Hi yogis, welcome back to another episode of RunYogi Diaries. This is your host Santosh Shiva. I hope you had a wonderful week and you also got some time to play, swim, bike, run, whatever is your thing. Every week I bring you conversations with people who are on a journey of well-being and endurance. I hope they spark some possibility in you, leave you with some tips and perhaps some inspiration to perspire. If you like this channel, consider subscribing to it, hit like if you like this video, and leave your comments below and let us know what you think. This episode is also available on all major podcast platforms if audio is your thing. My guest today is a lifelong runner and more recently a sponsored barefoot ultra runner. He describes himself as a primalist. He is a nutritionist, Qigong, Breathwork and Primal movement instructor, a world-class life empowerment coach and holistic connection specialist. He has dedicated his entire life to the pursuit of self-connection and mastery, from studying Vajrayana, Tantric Buddhism and inner fire to working extensively with shamanic plant medicines and sacred space ceremony. His mission in life is simple: to show you how to reconnect to the primal elemental forces within yourself and become the most powerful liberated version of you possible. Let's get behind the scenes on what defining moment set him on this path of self-discovery, off the beaten path. Let's welcome C.Jon Sawyer. Hey C, welcome to RunYogi Diaries.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure indeed. You're almost a real life yogi, and this is RunYogi podcast. So what a wonderful combination, and such a pleasure having you here. You have such a powerful credential. You've got a degree. You've studied herbal medicine. You've been in military, and been through that space, and then you've studied tantric, Buddhism and shamanism, and you have your own framework of all of these that you put together. So we want to learn a lot, obviously, in the conversation. So before that, let me have you do a quick personal introduction, and then we'll kind of jump in.
100%. Yeah, my name is C. Sawyer, and I currently live just north of Tampa in Florida with my wife and two dogs. And what you're about to hear is a small part of my journey. I know you want to unpack as much as you can. It's been an incredibly long journey, so we'll get as much as we can. But yeah, you're dead on the money. I've walked multiple journeys through this life. I've studied. I have several degrees in health-related fields, understanding the human body, anatomy, physiology, and how it relates to movement and that sort of thing, nutrition. And I've also gone the other way and moved away from the academic path and studied with shaman since arriving here in America. And I've worked a lot with plant medicines in sacred space, and also embraced that the Tibetan Buddhist Tantric path, and working with that quite a lot now to embrace and cultivate inner fire, or tumo.
Lovely. Yeah, it's all esoteric. At the same time, it's real, and so my audience and all the audience would love to hear, understand a little bit more of what you just said. So maybe we should start with a bit of a flashback. How did it all start? You're also an ultra runner, so let's get into how did it all start and how did running kind of enter this mix?
Yeah, totally. So it's a really interesting backstory. I was quite young when I started realizing that I didn't really find myself at home in the world that I was living in. I was growing up as the youngest of two in a household. Parents were still together and everything was okay, but something just wasn't quite right in my life, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I started asking some really big questions. And I remember this one particular day, I said to my mother, how do you know that your dream, when you're dreaming, that's not really your real life, and when you're awake, it's not some kind of dream? And I could see her face kind of get really concerned, and she said, okay, we need to go and see somebody. And she took me to the local doctor. And she said, ask the doctor what you asked me. And I asked him the question, and he smiled and he said, well, because there's consequence. The reality is if you do something in real life, the next day there's still a consequence of that action. It's not like that in dreams. And I said to him, but how do we know that our real nature is not without that we don't have consequence? It's just part of who we are. And he kind of got this really tired look in his eyes and he said, I don't know the answer to that. You're going to have to go and meditate or something, see what you can find within yourself. And I had no idea what that meant. All I understood in that moment was that if this learned doctor, the most educated man I knew, couldn't answer these questions for me, that nobody could. I had to find these answers myself. So I took a journey, and that journey began with me finding my feet, so to speak, with running. It's where I learned how to meditate. I just took to the roads after school. I'd finish my lessons for the day, and I'd put my shoes on, and I'd go out and I'd start running. And I found the further I ran, the more life started to make sense to me. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how running ties into this for me.
Wonderful. And talk a little bit about that. So while you were running during this phase of inquiry, what were you discovering in the domain of some of the questions that you just shared?
Yeah, I don't think that it's necessarily I found any one specific answer. It's that I found almost like the antithesis of that. I found the opportunity to not have questions. So all of the questions disappeared in that space. And that was the most powerful thing I could have. It's like I connected with a silence or a stillness within myself where the questions didn't matter. And I recognized in that moment that this was the meditation the doctor was referring to, this space of stillness or silence within myself. It's not anything that I could become. It was an unbecoming of everything that I was to embrace the truth of myself, which was that silence or stillness. And I found that every time I went out running.
Yeah, beautiful. And that resonates with me, and it probably resonates with a lot of us who are running. I think the Run Yogi, the whole idea of Run Yogi came about with a similar context, because every time I've run, I've found myself in spaces which are the quieter spaces of my own being, and it might sound woo woo, but hey, you got to go run to really experience that. There are moments in running that you get into that space which feels pure, for a lack of a better word, whatever you want to call it, but it's just pure experience. So makes a lot of sense.
I won't take you off track too much because I know we're still very early in the piece, but when you say to some people this may sound like woo-woo, to anyone that's listening, or at any point, whether it's now or extended audience or anything like that, what I would say to that is, if it makes you feel good, then it's not woo-woo. There might not be science behind it, but if it feels good, then just go and do it. You don't need somebody with a piece of paper behind their name doing study after study to prove to you that it feels good to do something. If it feels good, just do it.
Yeah. And I think now there's enough science-backed evidence as well for folks who, necessarily depend on that. There's enough science-backed evidence that connects physical activity to, neurological growth and, brain growth. And there's enough data out there. But you're right, when you're starting off with something like this, it's not always backed by what happens in the lab and things like that. But hey, that's what mysticism all about, and you're a mystic, so you're not going to necessarily be doing things that are always prescribed in a book. You're going to be experimenting, pushing the boundaries, and that's what probably makes you exciting. And so you kept running, and then you've been running for a long time. That means, right? From age 16, you said, and you probably 20, 30 years since you've been running then.
Yeah, so I would have started probably quite early in my teens, casually. I've always had a thing for running, and it wasn't probably until I was 15 or 16 that I really started connecting with that space within myself in the run. And then, started using it more as medicine than anything else for myself. But so I'm in my mid 40s now, so it's been quite some time that I've been running.
And did you also did you mostly run use run as meditation, or did you also do any kind of competitive running at that time when you were young?
I never got into the competition side of things because I was always, I had a massive lack of confidence, and I couldn't bring myself to stand in competition in case I didn't perform well for whatever reason. And that would have just been shattering to an already fragile ego. So I didn't start competing at that stage. It wasn't until after my military service that I started competing.
So, choice of military, was that, how does that fit in this phase of life where you were exploring, asking questions? How did that happen?
Yeah, it was actually a really interesting segue in my life because as I was finishing school, I was getting quite heavily into to Buddhist meditation and exploring that Mahayana Buddhist path. And there was a monastery not too far from my house. So when I left school, I actually went to the monastery and spent about 6 months, and I was on the verge of taking vows as a Buddhist monk. And then I just completely changed tack, left the monastery, and went and joined the military. Now, it's something that probably, although it came out of left field, wasn't unexpected because my entire family before me were all military, and they looked at me as like the dark horse of the family, being that I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at that inward, more peaceful path. So to them, I guess they all breathed a sigh of relief when I left monastery and went and joined the military. But to me, it wasn't necessarily the greatest move, but it all worked, creating the tapestry of who I've become. So I am grateful for the path.
Right, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Because on one hand, there's you that's exploring, free flowing, and with these very abstract ideas, and then military, which is regimented. You probably had a very disciplined life, So I'm very fascinated how you managed to fit in the two. It almost must have been very conflicting in that sense, right?
Yeah, it didn't. It didn't fit well at all. And it was definitely super conflicting with the truth of my nature. And I guess that's part of the journey as it unfolded for me was I went through that, and it turned me into something that I wasn't, both in terms of the aggression that I was starting to experience and exhibit in my everyday life towards people, and this flightiness that I developed. I just, if somebody challenged me and it was more than I felt I could overcome with that aggression, I would just take off. So I feel like in many respects that the military service definitely created somewhat of a fracturing inside of me, but it was also a necessary part of the path. I needed to know what that felt like so that I could bring myself back together more completely.
Yeah, makes sense. So, coming back to running itself, while all this happening, and I'm sure being in military definitely added to your fitness. You must have become fitter physically for sure while you're going through this process. And from a running journey perspective, did you then go into like marathons and the events like ultra marathons during that time, or when did that happen?
Yeah, I actually started doing triathlon with the military. So every Thursday afternoon, anybody that was involved in a sport was exempt from duties. So I very quickly found a sport that was in alignment with something that was part of my life, which was endurance. They didn't do marathon or just running. It was, pick a sport. And the only thing that I connected with was triathlon. So I started doing that mostly to get out of duty. And I found that I really loved it. Aside from the swimming, I splash around in the kiddie pool. I can swim, and I can swim long distances, but I can't do it quickly. So that was the weakest leg for that whole thing, and that's why I never stuck with triathlon. I moved into adventure racing and then ultra marathon eventually. But yeah, it was definitely part of it. The army loved that I was a very fit runner.
Yeah. So when did ultra marathon? When did the world of ultras come in? Was it after you moved to these states, or did it happen while you were back in Australia?
Yeah, no. So I've been doing ultra marathons since I was in my early 20s, and racing. Australia. I raced the Glasshouse 100, which was a beautiful 100-mile race in the Glasshouse Mountains of Queensland, and I started doing my own events. I ran from Brisbane to the Gold Coast, which was about 120 kilometres, the route that I took. And then I started planning bigger and bigger runs. So I planned to run across the Tanami Desert in Australia, which is a stretch that goes from a place called Halls Creek in the Kimberley of Western Australia all the way down to Alice Springs. And it's 1,055 kilometres of desert trail. So I planned and attempted to run that. That wasn't a successful undertaking for me. I couldn't finish it, but it was great experience getting out there and knocking out several hundred miles over a series of days and just being in the desert. So that ultra running has always been a part of my background from the time I was in my early 20s.
Yeah. I don't know if you've heard of the monks in Japan. There is I don't remember the exact name of the monastery, but there are monks out there who, as a part of their initiation into the monastery, go on these 1,000-mile run or mountaineering expeditions. So it seems like in your case, ultra running just kind of fit in well because you were already in that path, for a lack of a better word, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost the medicine for me. And I say it like that because it wasn't always the healthiest of pursuits. Like
Mm.
anything, it can be abused. And I started to abuse it. There was a lot of fracturing inside of me from my military days, there was a lot of trauma. There was some younger childhood trauma in there that I'd managed to just push down deep enough that the Army psych screening couldn't find it. And it just got exasperated with all of that. So for me, running, especially ultra marathon running, was very much about running from my problems. It became more of me trying to replace one pain that I could feel growing inside of myself with another pain that I could control. And that's what I did. I pushed far enough with it that I started to realize this is what I'm doing. There was kind of like this collision of these worlds. There was this holistic pursuit of running that I had from the time I was very young, where running created silence within me. But then there was also this aspect where I was running for the wrong reasons. I was running to escape one pain because I had this new pain that I could focus on. It's just this pain of running massive miles. And when these two elements collided within myself, it almost created an explosion of just, I mean, I don't even really have an analogy of what it was. It was just an explosion of truth, I guess, that I couldn't run for these purposes anymore. If I wanted to embrace it, I needed to change things within myself. And that's where I guess the pilgrimage of my life ultimately began.
Yeah, let's maybe get into that because that's a very critical. It looks like that's been a defining aspect of your life. So when you say pilgrimage, talk a little bit about that. What happened after that?
Yeah, so at that point, I basically loaded up my 4x4 van and took off. I took off into the middle of Australia and I made my way into the deserts and didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't have any cell service. And I was out there for, a huge period of time. And I was just living, parked in my van, sleeping in my van, howling at the moon, running around barefoot in the desert, going crazy. And I remember there was one night in particular that I was watching the sun go down and I felt super alone and I felt really afraid. And I just felt this massive well up of emotion. And I started crying my eyes out and I was like literally thumping the ground and beating my fists. And, it was just, again, like it was an explosion of emotion in that moment. And when the sun set and everything became still and calm and there was no sound and there was nothing to be seen except just a perfect set of stars above me and there was nothing else. I was lying on the roof of my van looking at the stars. This calmness swept over me and I realized that was me almost coughing out that crap that I'd been carrying. And that was a beautiful defining moment of my life. It literally was a moment that I set myself free. And so the next day I loaded everything up and drove out of the desert and found civilization and, started reintegrating myself into to civilization. That wasn't where it ended. That was kind of where it began, because as things go, we tend to think we take the medicine and we're better, but it's not how it works. We take the medicine and it just opens a doorway for us. And then that doorway is something we have to step through. And then we take the journey of understanding. That's the integration. And so I then spent the next several years integrating that. And that journey was a process that took me to the northern Fijian Islands, where I became a yoga teacher trainer, or a yoga teacher, I should say, did my yoga teacher training. It took me to the jungles of northern Thailand, and I was running around barefoot up there, hunting and living with them, and then from there the story just, I guess, continues with a bit more normality. That's the point where I met my now wife, and life just unfolded as it has.
Wow. So what happened to you on the van in the middle of a desert is probably what people call enlightenment in a lot of cultures, right?
I would say that it was a moment of expansion within myself. I tend to shy away from the word enlightenment purely because there's so much stigma attached to it. It's almost like the word love.
Yeah.
It gets thrown around a whole lot. It has this huge, big, scary meaning to it. It literally just means knowing yourself. And I would say in that respect, then yes, it was a process of me knowing myself in that moment. There was definitely an unveiling for me. And it's taken a long time from that point for me to make sense of and integrate the experience. But it's definitely enriched me in ways I couldn't have imagined for having done so.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I hear you. And there's always a challenge, like in the Eastern cultures where I come from in India. We use words like nirvana and moksha, and you hear about people going to Himalayas and meditating for years and maybe days and years on end to sometimes talk about some of the experiences that you're talking about. And sometimes it's hard to retrofit that into a Western vocabulary because there isn't an exact word that might represent what moksha is or what nirvana is. And I'm a part of a modern world, and it's not like I understand and know all of it, but I know I do get a sense of it in a way. When someone's talking, like in your case, you're talking about an actual experience, and there's no way for me to replicate what you experienced there, but I have a sense of it. What it could have been. And so that and not many people are lucky to experience that. So you definitely are one of those lucky ones in a way.
One of the interesting things that happened when I had come out of the desert, I went south, and you're probably not super familiar with the geography of Australia, but I basically came down the middle from Birdsville all the way down the desert trail, and then I arrived at what's known as the Great Australian Bight, and it's just this big stretch of cliffs with the raw Southern Ocean right there. And I felt like I had been set free in many respects, but I also felt like I was now without any real purpose or direction. What was next after that experience? So I almost gave an ultimatum to the divine, if you will, and I came out to the cliff, and I stood on the cliff, and I was looking down at the ocean, and there was a little stretch of beach just off to the side, and I thought, okay, the water's probably deep enough. If I have a purpose in life, allow me to survive, bring me back. And I jumped into the water. And as soon as I hit the water was absolutely freezing. It was like being stabbed with all these needles all over my body. And I was swimming for all I could, and there was a strong current that I couldn't have seen from the cliff. And I was being pulled like further out, and I'm looking up at the cliffs, looking for anybody to save me, to shout out to help me. And there was no one there. I was in an isolated stretch of the country. And after about 15 minutes, my arms just felt so fatigued, and I was out of breath. And I thought, that's it, I'm done. And this wave of panic swept over me, and then I went underneath the water. And in that moment, I became completely calm. And it was in that calmness where I had just completely given up all sense of myself. And right at that minute, a wave broke right on top of me and pushed me onto the little beach. And then I climbed up the cliff, collapsed next to my van, and I lay there for the rest of the day just looking at the sky. And I had this didgeridoo that I own, and I was able to blow into it, but I couldn't circular breathe. after that experience, I grabbed my didgeridoo that night and started playing it, and I could play it perfectly. Just circular breathing, and I was just sitting there for hours beside my fire playing my didgeridoo. So just a little interesting side story.
Yeah, fascinating. And you said you talked about purpose, and did that at that point you get a sense of your purpose?
I had no idea what it was, but I knew there was definitely one in there.
Okay, and I think you went on to you of course continued running, and while all this was happening in your life, right? And you also went on to get certified as a coach. You educated yourself in many ways about the modern knowledge of physical science and movement. So it seems like some of those things have converged, and you now have a point of view about mixing all of that together, and you call it primalist lifestyle. So talk a little bit about that. Maybe I'm messing this up, but if you can talk to what exactly is that what you do?
No, that sounded perfect to me. So ultimately, it literally is. It's kind of like that path that walks down the middle of both sides of it. So you've got, like we were talking earlier, people that need the hard science. They need to understand that, and if it's not present, then there's no truth in what you're saying. And then you've got the other side that are so far removed from caring about the science and are almost very airy fairy, I guess, if you will, a little ungrounded. There is a path that walks through the middle of both of those, and they do meet in the middle. And that's what I've dedicated my life to, is finding that point of balance between the two. So I understand the science. I've studied physiology, I've studied anatomy, I understand how the body works. I've studied multiple fields. I have a degree in Western herbal medicine. I've studied, naturopathy. I've studied nutrition. There's multiple fields there that support my understanding of how the body works and how it works optimally. And then on the other side of that, I have these experiences that can't be defined by that science. Experiences within the shamanic world, working with plant medicines in sacred space, ayahuasca, being shot out into the universe and having this huge overview of how things work, how a thought creates. Being able to see that, science can't map that. Doesn't mean it's not real. And so there's definitely a pathway between the two. And what I'm coming to realize is that pathway for me, from my aspect of it, and that's just one viewpoint. It may not be right for anybody else, but my viewpoint of that is that pathway is what I'm referring to as earthborn primalist. And that earthborn primalist is referring to us as beings that can interact with the natural world. And from that point of connection, we'll be given and shown everything we need and want to learn.
Yeah, very relevant. I think it's very relevant. And where I come from, which is India, we have something called Ayurveda, for example. It's been there for thousands of years, which is a system of medicine which is nature oriented. It's uses the plants and herbals system for cure, and then you have yoga and all of that stuff, right? So completely makes sense, and it's very relevant to our modern day life, to be able to balance that. Now you are also a ultra runner, and you also run barefoot, right? And that's how that's what got me fascinated about what you do. So it seems like all of what you do, and then you're running barefoot for these long distances. Talk a little bit about that, like how's that helping you, and how do you do it? So for someone who's listening to this, who's a runner, right? What are the challenges we deal with? We have flexibility issues, we have mobility issues, we have injuries with shoes on, with all the gadgets on, and here's primalist, leading a minimalist lifestyle, running barefoot, and you're fine. So talk to us a little bit about how can others incorporate something like that in their life.
Yeah, I absolutely believe, and again, it's one of those things that I have no way with what I have of scientifically mapping this, but I absolutely believe the connection to the earth, like real connection to it, as in our bare skin on the earth has a way of recharging us. And I believe that in many respects, the human body is, we're both a battery and an oscillator. We store charge, but we generate charge. Qigong is a perfect example of that. Qigong, however you want to pronounce it. Something that I've studied a lot and I love doing it. I love my practice. Qigong will say that as you twist certain movements, you're generating charge, you're generating qi. Now, you have a way of bringing that qi into central locations, these dantians within the body, and you can store it or you can use it. You can replenish your different energy centers. There's a similar practice across all of the different schools. Yoga has their version of it, Chinese, traditional and classic Chinese medicine, they all have their own versions of it. But ultimately what happens is, I believe, through my experience, when I was running in shoes, I was cutting off connection to that almost primal charge to the earth, because shoes are insulating forces. Fact of the matter is, if you've got several inches of rubber under your feet, you could literally grab a live wire and it's not going to ground through you. That's just a fact. If you were barefoot and you grab that live wire, you're going to die. And the reason being is because you've now created a perfect circuit to allow that charge to ground. Well, it works the same way. The earth is also an oscillator. The earth is also a battery. It's got its own charge. Now, what I started to realize as I ran barefoot is that I was able to come back from a run that I would normally be feeling a little bit fatigued from, and I wasn't feeling fatigued. What made the difference? Bare skin on the earth was allowing that charge to come back into my body. And I actually got into a little heated discussion with someone on the barefoot group that we met on, who completely disagreed with the concept of earthing or grounding. It's not real, it can't be measured, it's just crap, it's snake oil. And to that I say, it may be true, it may be snake oil, it may be complete crap, but the fact of the matter is, I feel better when I come in from a run after doing it barefoot. Now, the journey to going barefoot, if somebody is running in shoes and they're a little bit intrigued by what I've just said and they want to start taking the journey, I would say do it slowly. It's taken me a good 4 years to be completely barefoot, out to any distance, on any terrain. It's taken me about 4 years to get to that point. During that time, I haven't done everything right, but what I have done has enabled me to now thrive without injury on my longer miles. I don't get any impact injuries anymore. My running style has completely changed. The one key that I would suggest you use, no matter what you're doing, is always use your skin as the benchmark of how far you can go. And what I mean by that is, if you go out onto the pavement and you do 2 miles and your feet are covered in blood by the end of that, then that is too much for you. Your joints are going to be okay with it. The skin is weaker than the joints, the connective tissue, all of those ligaments and tendons that can cause you problems further up in your knees, your hips, your lower back. If your skin can survive and isn't damaged after the end of a barefoot run, then your connective tissue, the entire kinetic chain is going to be okay. So you use your skin as the indication rather than the kinetic chain.
Makes sense. And what about your 100-miler? When did you do that barefoot? That was recently, right?
Yeah, so that was a run that I've done basically on my own bat. It wasn't a competition. It was just something that I went out and did. I do have a competition coming up, which is the Long Haul 100 here in Florida. It's Central Florida, and that's in January. And so that's going to be barefoot for me as well.
Is that okay? So is that going to be your first official event where you're going to do 100 on barefoot?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing. And what kind of terrain is it going to be?
I believe it's varied. I haven't been out to the site, but it's a blend of hard packed dirt, some sand. So I think some grassy stretches.
Nice.
Yeah.
So terrific. Now good luck with that. We will cheer for you and make sure that hope and intend that you complete that. So talking about kind of pivoting a little bit about your coaching and what you do at Earthbound, right? Is it Earthborn? right? The two
Earthborn.
things.
Yeah.
What do you do there? What kind of coaching do you provide, and how do you help people using some of the things that you've put together?
Yeah, so it's something that I've really only just gone back to after some time of not. Coaching hasn't been at the forefront of my mind for the past 12 months or so. Just, it's been a period of deep introspection for myself to really figure out what it is that I want to offer the world.
Hmm.
And over that time, I've been able to collect all of basically everything that I am, everything that I've been doing, and bring it together in this one package that's now known as Earthborn Primal. And the coaching is at this stage literally just offering these small little automated courses, I guess, that help somebody become more connected in their life, more connected to the natural world, more connected to themselves, more connected to one another, and just to reap the benefits of health, wellness, and vitality that flow from that. So, as an example, I've got this course that's a free offering at the moment on my website, and it's food sovereignty. And it's literally what it says. So, just to give you a little bit of backstory behind this, I discovered 7 keys to self mastery. Now, that may sound like a big claim, but these 7 keys, they exist within all of us. And the way I like to describe it is, imagine that you are a house. Some of those rooms in the house are well known to you. It's like your kitchen. There's no doors on it. It's just open. You go in and out of it all the time. You know the kitchen very well. You've got some rooms inside yourself that are like that. You've got some rooms that are closed doors, but they're not locked, and you go into them periodically, like the bedroom. Your bedroom door is potentially closed. You go into the bedroom once a day. It's not as often as the kitchen, but it's there and it's known to you. The bathroom might be another one. And then you've got some doors that are locked, and you've potentially never actually looked in there. You bought a house as a locked door and you don't have a key for it, and you've never bothered to get a key made for it. So you've just lived there with this door shut and you don't know what's behind it. It doesn't mean that you can't get access to it. It just means it's going to require a little bit of work. So what I've discovered is that there are 7 keys within each of us. And those 7 keys are what we do in our everyday lives. It's the way we handle ourselves around certain elements. And those elements, once we have mastered them one by one, each one leading to the next, then enables us to gain total mastery over ourselves and become a true creator of our own life. Now, that first key is food. That's key number 1. If you cannot control yourself when it comes to your food habits, you've got no point in trying to control anything else in your life. If food controls you, even any aspect of it, if you have to have a coffee to start your morning, you're not in control of your food habits. Now, there's nothing wrong with having coffee of a morning. I love my morning coffee, but it needs to be a choice. It can't be a compulsion. It can't be a habit. It can't be a craving, because from that position, you don't have sovereignty over that. So food sovereignty is a program that I have that's a small free offering. It's about 15 pages on my website currently. And it breaks down our relationship with food, not so much from a nutrition or dietetic point of view, but more from an understanding of where we stand in relation to food and how a lot of our eating habits are emotionally driven or habitual cravings. And that when we take a step back from those, we go through a process of elimination that at the end of that, we gain real control and we start listening to our body. We start learning how to listen to our body. Our body's always speaking. With so many different systems of eating on the planet, there's new diets popping up all the time. How do we know what's the right way to eat for us? Your body knows. Your body has this fundamental inbuilt compass when it comes to food. You just can't hear it when you're overwhelmed with emotional eating habits and cravings and patterns and things like that. So this talks about that and puts it into perspective. So that's one aspect. I've also got a 28-day body reset, which is that elimination process for 28 days, how to go about eating for 28 days that starts removing those emotional eating patterns and cravings and habits and all that sort of thing. And once they're gone, then we're in a position to start listening to our body and doing what it needs us to do. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so that's awesome. Thanks for sharing your journey here, and it seems like what's next is you seem to be continuing to develop this 7 keys. One is food. What about the other 6 keys? Is there something you can talk to us about it, or is that
Oh,
work in progress?
absolutely. Yeah, no, I can definitely share the keys with you. So
Yeah, go ahead.
the first one is food, and again, I like to liken this to a house, the process of restoring a house. So if you've got this house and it's all run down and the door's kind of knocked off its hinges and the yard's all overgrown, there's plaster hanging off the walls and the wires hanging out of the ceilings, and you've got raccoons breeding in there on stained rugs and things like that. Anything that you want to try and bring into your world in terms of like you're attracting abundance, you want to attract a partner, or something like that, you're trying to start a business from that state within yourself. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're hugely overweight, but you'll know within yourself if this is the state you're in, physically. If your body's in this state, you're eating pizza pockets every night. This is kind of where you're at, right? So that's what working with food does. That's the first key. It's a matter of doing the heavy work, putting plaster back on the walls, putting the rewiring, shooing the animals out, taking care of the yard work, making the house kind of presentable. This is one of the reasons why. So when we get to key 2, which is breath, working with the breath, so many people will go to the breath first. And if food isn't in place, trying to go to the breath is literally like trying to dust the windowsills in that demolished house. It's pointless. You could dust the windowsills. You could bring in a cleaning person and have the windowsills dusted and the bench tops wiped down. But you've still got plaster hanging off the walls. You've still got wiring hanging out of the ceiling. It's kind of pointless. So we start with food. Once food is done and it's brought the house back to repair, then we go to breath. Now, breath is that more, refined cleaning within the house. This is where we start cleaning and decorating the house. So that breath work. But the thing with breath work also is that the further we go with it, the more we really start controlling ourselves. And this is where the journey gets really beautiful. So just as an example, I work quite heavily with Tumo, or inner fire breathing. And Tumo being the goddess of fire and passion, from Tibet. And the practice is breathing in a particular way that starts increasing your body temperature so that you can withstand the cold. Now, Wim Hof is a great proponent of this. He's discovered a way through Tumo breathing, and he has his Wim Hof method now. One of the things that this does for you, just as an example, this morning, so I have this chest freezer that I have in my garage because I live in Florida. It never gets cold here. I have a chest freezer full of water. And the water is held with a thermostat at a constant 37 degrees Fahrenheit. It's about 2 degrees Celsius. Mm-hmm. And I sit in that every morning after doing my Tumo breathing. Now, I watched my thermostat because I cut power to the freezer, so it can't turn itself on while I'm in it, just in case water leaks through. But while I was sitting in there this morning, I'm watching the thermostat as I'm doing my Tumo in a fire breathing. The thermostat's climbing, and I actually managed to raise the temperature of the water 10 degrees while I was in there this morning. So it went from 37 to 47, almost 50 degrees, just from 5 minutes of sitting in there doing Tumo breathing. This is how powerful we are with our breath. So that's just one example of what we can achieve. We have the ability to change which nervous system we're operating from. We can shift from our autonomic, that sympathetic nervous system, to our parasympathetic nervous system. We can do that. It's no longer autonomic. We can choose what we do with that. We can activate our sympathetic nervous system if we have some kind of pathogen invading our body. We can attack it actively. We can also deactivate and turn on rest and digest if our body's overacting with something. So very powerful. The breathing is amazing. Mm-hmm. The next one after breathing is conditioning. And conditioning refers to things like being barefoot on the earth, being subjected to freezing cold water, being subjected to extreme heat in summer. And there's definitely gentle pathways that need to be taken when doing this, because the fact is, as we start to move into conditioning, we're really working with the elements, and the elements within us, the elements without us. And those elements don't play. They are a playful force, but they don't play. Like they will hurt you if you go too fast into that. There's a lot of people in the Wim Hof group that have really hurt themselves because they've mistreated the cold. The cold is a formidable force. So is the heat. There were times throughout the summer here in Florida that I was training for my ultramarathon running. I ran 2 50-mile ultramarathons this summer here in Florida. And the temperature was, well and truly into 100 degrees Fahrenheit while I was racing those races. What ultimately happens is you can condition yourself to thrive in that environment. But if you do it too fast, you're going to cause problems for yourself. Now, with the heat conditioning, one of the things that I would do is I would go out and I would run in the middle of the day for, a 10-mile run, a 15-mile run, and I wouldn't drink any water on that run. And I would come back and pour myself a scorching hot bath, and I would sit in the hot bath for 45 minutes still without having had any water. At that point, you need to be super connected to what's happening inside yourself, because you can very easily black out. You can very easily lose consciousness. If you're in the bath, you're going to drown. If no one's home, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. So we approach that very gently. So that's conditioning. Movement is the fourth key. Now, when we move in a primal way. There's ways that we can move our body that will expend our energy. There's ways that we can move our body that will restore and replenish our energy. Being barefoot on the earth is one of those ways. We can run in a way that actually regenerates charge, so we can run further if we're barefoot. Doing Qigong is another example of that. All those twisting movements of Qigong, that regenerates charge. So we learn to move in a way that our body moves and twists and turns, and it's the way our body was designed to move. One of the things that the Qigong master that I was training under said, long spine, long life. Our spine is made to be long. Our spine is made to be flexible. And so many people, once they get to that, golden age of 40, their spine is rigid and they're constantly getting sore backs. Your spine's not meant to be sore like that. Like, your spine is meant to be super flexible. So that was primal movement. That's key number 4. Key number 5 is silence. Being able to sit within that silence and stillness within yourself. Now, we are so distracted in this day and age. Everyone's got one of these. Every second of the day, we've got our faces in something that's active and we're engaged with it constantly. We need that constant stimulus. Taking that time to step back from that constant stimulus and finding that stillness within ourselves. And when the mind starts to wander, when the mind starts to go here and there, and it does it 100 times a minute, we say with gratitude, no, mind, I appreciate what you're doing. You're doing what you were given to me to do, but you're not controlled right now. Come back here. We're going to focus on the breath for a minute. We're going to stay still. And so that stillness. The next key number 6, is all about change, being able to embrace change. We're too rigid in our lives. We want things to remain the same. We want security, we want safety, and we want comfort. And we do whatever we can to keep those things in place. The world is a dynamic place. The universe is full of dynamic energy. And being able to embrace that change and flow with it, it's very much like a river that flows. And when it hits a boulder, it doesn't just stop because that boulder is within its way. It finds a way to flow around it. So we need to start embracing those elements of change within our life. And then the final key is commitment. If we're not committed to our path within ourselves, it's pointless in even starting.
Yep. Beautiful. That's beautiful. I think that's gold, and whatever you shared, and
thank you.
Back by real experience, not theory, right?
Exactly. It's backed by my experience, and that's
absolutely. That's what I meant.
That's the point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But having said that, I've also taken people through these keys, and I've seen amazing results in the people that I've worked with within these keys. So it's not something that's unique to me. It's my experience, but it's not unique to me. I can replicate this.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered quite a lot of ground. Thanks for sharing, your journey and where you are, and your framework of how you think about some of these very important aspects of living. And this is all very important, very relevant. By a lot of people might look at it as ancient wisdom, but it fits right in. We're dealing with mental health issues. We're dealing with stress. So all of what you're doing is very relevant. And it also fits into, endurance sports pursuits, because it's very much intertwined with all of that we talked about. So thanks for sharing that. Kind of moving on, I have a fun Q&A round with all my guests, and I'm sure you have a lot of fun. You definitely have a lot of fun. Your life is full of adventure, man. I mean, I don't. I think these are things that we get to see in movies, the kind of things you've done. So but I have a few questions that we can dwell on for fun of it. If
Yeah,
you're ready for
let's
that.
go. Absolutely. Let's roll on.
First off, I know food is the first key that you talked about, uh,
Hmm.
but but at the same time, as humans, um, we do indulge. So my question is, do you eat junk food, and what's your favorite one, if at all?
Of course, I eat junk food. And again, the point is that you need to choose it rather than it
Yeah,
choosing you. But that's
yeah.
beside the point. We've already done that. So in the interest of fun, junk food. I think pizza is something that I'm a really big sucker for. If it's a good pizza,
Good pizza. It's
yeah.
still healthy. It's still healthy in your what you eat is healthy junk food. Awesome. What's your favorite pre long run meal? What do you prefer?
Well, once again, it's going to be pizza, and that's something that I almost have a ritual of, and I have since I was very young. Is the night before a race, I'll have a large pizza, or I'll grab a couple of you know, like soft drinks or something like that. I don't really drink alcohol very much, very occasionally, but I'll get myself a nice dessert, maybe some Ben and Jerry's ice cream or something like that. I'll have a pizza. I'll have the ice cream. I'll just getting those final calories in before the event.
Yeah. You see, yogis do eat ice cream and yogis do have pizzas. The point is, like you said, it's just not eating it compulsively, but choosing it and having, right? That's really what the message is. So eating junk
It's
food is not a bad thing.
definitely nothing
Yeah.
is bad. It's
Yeah.
it's it's what's behind it.
Yeah.
It's the
Absolutely.
motivation.
Absolutely. Uh, Music. Do you listen to music?
Mm. I love listening to music.
All right. A song that uplifts you.
Uh, Life is a Highway by I think it was what was his name? I can't think of who sung it, but there's a song, Life is a Highway, and I love that song. Every time I hear it, it's old school. I just feel really good. I'm also getting a lot into, there's a Scottish drumming group called Clanadonia, and they do a song called Tubard, and whenever I hear that, I just have to start jumping around. I can't help it.
All right. All right. Uh, what else do you do for fun other than running, I guess?
Yeah, so I love kayaking,
Hmm.
anything involved in nature. I
Hmm.
love gardening. I love being out with my plants. Uh, I love shooting, whether it's firearms, rifles, or my bow. I have a compound bow that I love to shoot, purely targets. I don't shoot at anything, but targets. But I enjoy the sport. So,
Okay, the last question I have, which is something I asked all my guests, is if we made a movie of your life, which I think is very interesting. I'm sure anyone in Hollywood would want to sign you up. Uh, but let's see what you say about it. If we made a movie of your life, what genre would you put it in, and who would you like to play your role?
ooh, that is a really good question. Tough question. I've got so many favorite actors. I often thought, so just, very quickly, if you don't mind, I
Mhm.
wrote a book called The Last Alchemist, which is available on Amazon right now. And
Hmm.
it's a novel, but it talks about the hermetic principles of the universal principles of hermetic alchemy. And I always figured that if that was turned into a movie, the main character, who was loosely modeled on me and my life, would be played by Keanu Reeves. Um, I don't know whether he
Perfect.
could quite pull off the beard or not. So
Well, we'll
yeah.
use computer graphics for that then. If he can't, well, that's a great
What
choice. And he's coming
what kind
back.
of
Sorry, go ahead.
what kind of genre would it be? I think it would have to be like an action comedy, I guess.
Hmm.
Maybe something like the old school Big Trouble in Little China with Kurt Russell. A little bit
Yeah,
of comedy, a little bit of action, a little bit of mysticism woven in, something
yeah,
like that. I think that would be fun.
yeah, absolutely. Great choices. Great choices. You did well. Thank you for sharing that. Learned a few more things about you in the process. Hey, we're kind of coming up to the end of our conversation.
Hmm.
It was a very insightful and fascinating insight into what you do. Obviously, you live on the edge. You've lived on the edge. You're still living on the edge. You're pushing the boundaries, exploring new things. I'll give you the last word. Any final message to the audience? Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, don't compromise. This version of life, we don't know that you're going to get another shot at this. There's talk, reincarnation, you're going to come back. There's speculation. We don't know. Science can't back that up yet. There's no evidence of that. As far as we know, this is all we've got. And so don't compromise. If you're not happy in a situation, change it. It's reflecting an element of yourself. So you have control over that. All you need to do, literally, other than taking outward action, is to ask yourself inside, what is it inside myself that this situation is reflecting right now? When you find that and you make a move to change it, the external will respond and you will change your life for the better. So don't compromise.
Wonderful. Again, C, thank you so much for taking time out and sharing yourself here. I'll let you go and have a wonderful rest of the evening, and I wish to stay in touch.
Absolutely. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you.